The early morning sun streamed through the large glass windows of the bustling airport terminal. Travelers rushed past, their footsteps echoing across the polished floors as they clutched coffee cups and suitcases. Among the sea of faces was Marcus Hill, a sharply dressed man with an air of quiet confidence. His tailored suit, immaculate shoes, and expensive watch hinted at a man who had worked hard to get where he was. Today, Marcus was flying out on an important trip, one that could change the future of his company. As he approached the gate, Marcus noticed the faint glances people gave him. He was used to it. Growing up, he'd faced prejudice and assumptions that followed him into adulthood. Yet, none of it had stopped him. If anything, it had fueled his ambition. He took his first steps onto the plane, greeted by the warm smiles of the crew. Or so he thought. "Welcome aboard, sir," a cheerful flight attendant said, a smile faltering slightly as she caught sight of him. Marcus nodded politely and moved down the aisle toward his seat. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee and faint traces of jet fuel, a comforting aroma to frequent flyers like him. Settling into his first-class seat, Marcus pulled out his tablet to review his notes. The murmurs started almost immediately. A young woman in a crisp uniform, her name tag reading Emily, stood at the front of the cabin, scanning the passengers. Her expression changed when her gaze landed on Marcus. She leaned toward another flight attendant and whispered something. They both glanced his way, their faces revealing surprise, and something else, something unpleasant. A few minutes later, Emily approached Marcus with a practiced smile. "Sir, would you like a beverage before takeoff?" she asked. Her tone was polite, but her body language said otherwise. "I'll have a coffee, please," Marcus said evenly, not missing the way her eyes lingered on him, as if she was sizing him up. She hesitated, then gave a curt nod, and walked off without another word. The interaction seemed minor, almost forgettable, until Marcus noticed that the other passengers were being treated differently. Drinks were served quickly, accompanied by friendly chatter. Yet when Marcus politely asked for his coffee again, Emily's tone sharpened. "We'll get to you," she said curtly, turning away before he could respond. Marcus leaned back, watching the scene unfold. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the difference in treatment was glaring. Still, he decided to let it slide, hoping it was a one-off incident. As the flight took off and the hours ticked by, it became harder to ignore. Every time he requested something, a refill, a blanket, Emily's responses grew colder. At one point, she didn't even bother responding, walking past him as if he weren't there. Other passengers began to notice, exchanging uneasy glances. It wasn't until a fellow traveler spoke up that things escalated. "Excuse me," an older woman said, waving Emily over. "I think you forgot to bring this gentleman his drink." Her tone was polite but firm. Emily's cheeks flushed. "I didn't forget," she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. "We're busy." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the older woman stunned. Marcus remained calm, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. The other passengers whispered among themselves, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him. Some seemed sympathetic. Others avoided looking altogether. What Emily didn't know, however, was who Marcus really was. Marcus wasn't just another passenger in first class. He was the owner of the very airline she worked for. And while he had come on board that morning intending to stay under the radar, Emily's behavior had made that impossible. As the plane soared through the clouds, Marcus made a quiet decision. He wouldn't let this slide, not for his sake, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder with the airline's logo emblazoned on the front. Inside were documents that revealed his identity, his position, and his authority. But for now, he said nothing. He would wait for the right moment to reveal the truth. The tension in the cabin grew heavier as the flight continued, the other passengers increasingly aware of the awkward dynamic. Emily seemed oblivious to the unease she had created, too focused on maintaining her sense of superiority. Marcus glanced out the window at the endless blue sky, a calm determination settling over him. This wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example, about showing that dignity and respect should be extended to everyone, no matter their background or appearance. As the plane prepared for its descent, Marcus's moment was fast approaching. He could already see the shock on Emily's face when she realized the truth. But what would happen next? The plane began its descent, and the faint hum of the engines shifted turn. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, securing trays and instructing passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Marcus sat quietly, watching the activity around him. The folder with his airline's logo rested in his lap, its presence a subtle reminder of the power he held, though power wasn't what he sought to wield. Marcus wasn't the kind of man who needed to flaunt his success. He had built his airline from the ground up, starting with nothing but an idea and a drive to prove the doubters wrong. Years of late nights, hard work, and persistence had brought him to this point, but his path hadn't been an easy one. Even after achieving success, he still faced the same looks, the same dismissive attitudes he had grown familiar with since childhood. His mind drifted back to the early days, long before luxury first-class cabins and tailored suits. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, Marcus had watched his parents work tirelessly to provide for their family. His mother, a schoolteacher, and his father, a mechanic, instilled in him the values of hard work, resilience, and treating people with dignity. It was a lesson Marcus carried with him through every stage of his life. As a young man, Marcus had encountered countless challenges in the business world. Investors doubted his abilities, competitors underestimated him, and society often seemed intent on reminding him of the barriers he was supposed to stay behind. But Marcus had a gift, an unshakable determination to rise above every obstacle. He had learned to choose his battles carefully, knowing when to push back and when to let actions speak louder than words. This, however, felt like one of those moments where action was necessary. Emily passed by again, avoiding eye contact as she collected empty glasses from other passengers. Her demeanor had shifted slightly. Perhaps she had noticed the growing tension in the cabin. The whispers among the passengers had not gone unnoticed, and some of her colleagues glanced nervously in Marcus's direction. One of the other flight attendants, a young man named Eric, approached Marcus with an apologetic smile. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the delay. Can I get you anything now?" "Coffee, water." His tone was genuinely kind, and Marcus appreciated the effort. "Thank you, Eric," Marcus replied. "A coffee would be great." Eric nodded and quickly returned with a steaming cup. Marcus took it with a nod of gratitude, but the gesture couldn't erase the growing discomfort. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, their curiosity and unease filling the air. As he sipped his coffee, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what had led Emily to treat him this way. Was it ignorance, bias, or simply a bad day? Whatever the reason, her behavior was unacceptable, and not just to him. As the owner of the airline, Marcus knew that the values of respect and fairness were supposed to be the cornerstone of their customer service. The plane touched down smoothly, the cabin filling with the sounds of seatbelts unclicking and passengers stretching off of the flight. The moment of truth was approaching, but Marcus remained calm. Emily moved to the front of the cabin, thanking passengers as they disembarked. Her smile returned, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. When Marcus reached her, she hesitated, her professional mask slipping for just a second. "Thank you for flying with us," she said, her tone cool and detached. Marcus nodded politely, saying nothing as he stepped into the jet bridge. Once inside the terminal, Marcus lingered near the gate, watching as the crew began to disembark. Eric was one of the first to step off, and Marcus approached him with a friendly smile. "Eric," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to say thank you for your professionalism on the flight." It didn't go unnoticed. Eric looked surprised but pleased. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Marcus glanced toward the gate, where Emily had just appeared, chatting with another crew member. She seemed unaware of his presence. "I'll need to speak with your team briefly," Marcus said to Eric, his tone calm but firm. "It's important." Eric nodded, his expression turning serious. "Of course, sir. I'll let the supervisor know." As the crew gathered in a nearby lounge, Marcus stood at the edge of the room, observing the group. Emily was among them, her demeanor relaxed, even cheerful. She had no idea who he was or what was about to happen. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Claire, greeted Marcus warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. How can we assist you?" Marcus pulled out his folder, opening it to reveal his credentials. The room went silent as the realization dawned on everyone present. Emily's expression froze, a smile disappearing as she stared at the documents in Marcus's hands. "I'm Marcus Hill," he said simply, his voice steady. "The owner of this airline." Emily's face turned pale, her confidence evaporating in an instant. The tension in the room was palpable, and all eyes were on Marcus as he continued. "I don't usually announce myself when I travel," he said, his gaze sweeping across the group. "But today, I felt it was necessary." He paused, letting his words sink in. Emily's hands trembled slightly, and she seemed unable to meet his eyes. "What happened on that flight was unacceptable," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "Not just because of how I was treated, but because it goes against everything this airline stands for. Our mission is to provide every passenger with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right. "Emily," he said, turning to face her directly, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Her mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Emily struggled to find the words, her face a mix of shock and embarrassment. Her gaze darted nervously around the room, as if searching for an escape or perhaps hoping someone might step in to rescue her. But the crew remained silent, their expressions ranging from surprise to uneasy. No one seemed willing to intervene, and the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. I didn't know," Emily finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean." She trailed off, her words faltering as she tried to piece together an explanation. Marcus watched her closely, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking for an apology born out of fear or panic. What mattered to him was understanding the mindset behind her actions, not just for his sake, but for the integrity of his airline. "This isn't about whether or not you knew who I was," Marcus said evenly. "It's about how you treated a paying passenger. How many others have experienced the same kind of disrespect without the ability to speak up?" Emily's face turned a deeper shade of red, and she looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. Claire, the supervisor, stepped forward, her voice steady but concerned. "Mr. Hill, I assure you, we take incidents like this very seriously. If you'd like, I can start an immediate review of the situation." Marcus nodded, appreciating her professionalism. "That's a start," he said, glancing briefly at the rest of the crew before turning his attention back to Emily. "But this isn't just about consequences. It's about making sure this never happens again." Emily finally looked up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. It wasn't personal." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Not personal? Then tell me, what was it?" Her silence spoke volumes, and Marcus let it hum in the air for a moment before continuing. "I grew up being judged before I even had a chance to prove myself," Marcus said, his tone softer now, but no less firm. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated, dismissed, or treated as less than. That's exactly what I've worked so hard to change, both for myself and for others." The crew seemed to collectively hold their breath, absorbing the weight of his words. Even Eric, who had been so attentive during the flight, looked thoughtful, as if reflecting on his own experiences. "Emily," Marcus continued, his voice steady but pointed, "I don't know your story. I don't know what led you to make the choices you did today. But I do know this. Our airline has a responsibility to treat every passenger with respect, no exceptions. If we fail at that, we fail at everything." Emily's lips parted as if to respond, but once again no words came. The room remained silent, the tension thick and unyielding. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, passengers from the flight had begun to linger near the gate, exchanging murmurs and curious glances. Word of the encounter between Marcus and the flight attendant had started to spread, though most didn't yet know who Marcus was. The air buzzed with speculation, the mystery of the quiet man in first class fueling whispered conversations. A middle-aged woman who had been seated near Marcus during the flight spoke up to a group of fellow passengers. He didn't say much, but you could tell he wasn't just anyone. The way he carried himself, it was like he had this quiet authority. Another passenger chimed in, nodding. I saw the flight attendant avoiding him the whole time. It didn't seem right. As the buzz grew louder, a young man pulled out his phone, typing rapidly into a social media post. Within minutes, photos of Marcus walking through the terminal with a folder bearing the airline's logo had begun circulating online. The caption read, "Man gets mistreated on flight. Turns out he owns the airline." Inside the lounge, Marcus remained unaware of the storm brewing online. His focus was entirely on the situation at hand. Claire had stepped aside to make a phone call, likely to higher management, while Emily continued to wrestle with her emotions. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his tone firm, but not unkind. I believe in second chances. But second chances come with accountability. You need to ask yourself if this is the right place for you, Emily. Because working here means upholding values that leave no room for bias or disrespect. Emily nodded slowly, her expression a mix of regret and reflection. I understand, she said quietly. Claire returned, her expression professional, but slightly tense. Mr. Hill, I've spoken with our regional manager, and they've assured me this incident will be reviewed immediately. We'll also arrange a meeting to discuss further steps to ensure our team is aligned with our core values. Marcus nodded, appreciating the swift action. Thank you, Claire. I'll expect a full report by the end of the week. As the crew began to disperse, Marcus lingered for a moment, his gaze lingering on Emily. He didn't want to leave her feeling crushed. But he also knew the importance of this moment, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Emily, he said, his voice quieter now, this isn't the end of your story. It's a chance to rewrite it. Don't waste it. With that, Marcus turned and walked out of the lounge, leaving the crew to process what had just happened. As he made his way through the terminal, his phone buzzed with notifications. He glanced at the screen, realizing that the story was already gaining traction online. Marcus sighed, knowing that the public's reaction would add another layer to the unfolding situation. But for now, his focus remained on the larger picture, creating a culture of respect and integrity, both within his airline and beyond. The whispers in the terminal followed him as he walked, but Marcus paid them no mind. His thoughts were already on the next steps, the work that still needed to be done to ensure this wasn't just an isolated incident, but a turning point for something greater.